My name is Leo, and for most of my life, the idea of intelligent life elsewhere in the cosmos was a comfort. It was a beautiful, theoretical blanket of stars, under which our tiny human dramas played out. That changed last October. Now, the silence of the universe feels like a mercy. I'm a sound engineer by trade, but my passion is bioacoustics, recording the sounds of nature. I'd booked a 2-week solo trek to the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico, a designated silent zone, miles from any radio interference. My goal was to capture the pristine, untouched soundscape, the wind through the canyon, the calls of nocturnal creatures, the rustle of the high desert. The first few nights were transcendent. I'd set up my high-gain parabolic microphone and my digital recorder, then lie back on my sleeping pad, listening through my headphones to a world most people never hear. It was a symphony of subtlety. On the fourth night, everything changed. It started as a faint, rhythmic pulse buried deep in the audio spectrum. It was so low, it was almost a vibration, a sub-bass hum that felt more like a pressure change in my inner ear than a sound. Whump, 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 like a massive, slow heartbeat. It was completely alien to the desert soundscape. There was no machinery for hundreds of miles, no flight paths overhead. I sat up, my professional curiosity instantly ignited. I adjusted the gain, filtering out the higher frequencies. The pulse grew clearer. It was perfectly metronomic, a single repeating tone every 1.7 seconds. I checked for equipment malfunction, for a faulty cable acting as an antenna. Nothing. This signal was being captured from the environment. Then, as I listened, the pattern changed. A second pulse began, overlapping the first. This one was faster, sharper. Tick, 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 tick. It wove around the slower whump, creating a complex, polyrhythmic pattern. It was no longer a pulse. It was a transmission. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't random. This was structured. I spent the next hour recording it, my hands trembling slightly. The pattern would continue for exactly 11 minutes, then fall silent for exactly 11 minutes before starting again. It was a loop, a message, driven by a mix of terror and a profound, gnawing need to understand. I did something I will regret for the rest of my life. I hooked my field speaker to the recorder and played the pattern back into the night, amplifying it, sending the alien rhythm echoing off the canyon walls. The response was immediate. The loop from the environment stopped. The desert fell into a silence so absolute it was deafening. Not a cricket chirped, not a leaf stirred. It was the silence of a held breath, of a world waiting. Then, a new sound erupted from my headphones. So loud and piercing, it felt like an ice pick driven into my eardrum. It was a shriek of pure data, a blistering white noise scream that was somehow also musical, layered with cascading fractals of sound that my brain couldn't process. I tore the headphones off, my ear ringing in agony. Outside my tent, the world had begun to glow. A soft phosphorescent light was bleeding up from the ground itself, illuminating the undersides of the juniper trees in an eerie, greenish-blue hue. The air crackled with static, and the smell of ozone and wet stone became overwhelming, choking out the familiar scent of sage and dry earth. I unzipped the tent flap, my heart hammering against my ribs. The canyon was bathed in the unearthly light, and standing, or rather posed, about 50 feet from my camp was the source. It wasn't a little gray man. It was a figure, maybe 7 feet tall, and it seemed to be made of the same glowing, bioluminescent material as the ground. Its form was shifting, unstable, like a man-shaped cloud of plasma or a swarm of synchronized fireflies. It had a head, arms, legs, but the proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too long, the head too small and tilted at an impossible angle. It had no face, just a smooth, glowing expanse where features should be. It didn't move, it just stood there, humming. The sound wasn't coming from the air. It was manifesting directly inside my skull, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated my teeth. It was the whump from the recording, but now it was a physical force. The entity raised one of its long, glowing arms. It wasn't arm of bone and flesh, but of condensed light, trailing faint tendrils of energy. And as it pointed a slender, needle-like finger at me, the sound in my head changed. The rhythmic pulse dissolved into a torrent. It wasn't a language of words, but of concepts, of images, of pure sensation, fired directly into my consciousness like a neurological bullet. I was flooded with a terrifying, incomprehensible vastness. I saw star systems being born and dying in fast forward. I felt the cold, empty hunger of a billion-year journey. I understood with horrifying clarity that this thing was not a traveler. It was a sampler, a collector, and I was the specimen. It was studying me, not my body, but myself, my memories, my fears. The very texture of my soul were being unfolded and examined with a cold, analytical precision. I felt my childhood terror of the dark being played back to me. I felt the ache of my first heartbreak as if it were fresh. It was cataloging the human experience, and the process was violently invasive, a psychic. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed, locked in the beam of its attention. The humming in my head grew louder, becoming a scream of a billion voices, all being processed and filed away. I felt my identity beginning to fray at the edges, my sense of self dissolving into its vast, alien database. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light snapped off. The crushing pressure in my head vanished. The desert sounds rushed back in. The wind, a distant coyote, sounding cheap and hollow. The entity was gone. I collapsed, vomiting onto the hard-packed earth. I was shivering, not from cold, but from a soul-deep violation. I packed my gear in the dark, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and hiked out to my car, driving through the night until I found a motel. I told no one who would believe me, but the encounter isn't over. I'm a sound engineer, and I recorded everything. The initial pulses, the shriek of data, the hum. I've listened back to the audio, and under them, a new sound that I didn't hear with my own ears at the time. It's a soft, digital clicking, like a Geiger counter, but faster. And nestled within those clicks, clear as a bell on the spectral analysis, is a sound that makes my blood run cold every time I hear it. It's the sound of my own voice, stripped of all emotion, perfectly parroting back a single looping phrase in a flat, metallic tone. Specimen logged, awaiting retrieval. They have my signature now. They know my frequency. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I'll hear a faint, almost imperceptible whomp, 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 coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It's not a question anymore. It's a tracking signal. They're just finishing the catalog, and I am just waiting for the collection to begin.